Welcome to the StoryClicks podcast, where we explore ways to grow your business, develop creativity, and live life better. I'm your host, Māris Prindulis. Raising funds for good causes can be hard. Nonprofits often struggle to raise funds, which limits their ability to create positive change. In this episode, we are thrilled to welcome Evan Cox. Evan is an expert in marketing and fundraising strategies for nonprofit organizations and small businesses. He runs a creative consulting firm that specializes in these areas. This episode will cover fundraising strategies, similarities and differences between regular businesses and nonprofits, marketing mistakes that nonprofit leaders make, and more. If you are a nonprofit leader looking to improve your organization's engagement and visibility, don't miss out on this episode. Here we go, interview with Evan Cox. Hey everyone, I'm so excited to welcome our guest today, Evan, who is passionate about nonprofit marketing and who has also been a fellow StoryBrand guide. Amazing, nonprofit is such a great theme. Evan, welcome to the show.
So great to be here. We actually went through the StoryBrand training together at the same time in Nashville, 2019. It's been a little while. So excited for us to get together again today. Should be a fun conversation.
Exactly. And it's also fun to see how everyone's life and business has developed. So, and I know, as I said, your passion is nonprofits and marketing for nonprofits. And tell us, how did you end up in that space?
That's a great question. So, prior to actually launching my own marketing and fundraising firm and going through the StoryBrand certification process where we met, I actually worked for over 15 years at a large international nonprofit based right here in St. Louis. Now, even though we were based in St. Louis, it was a global headquarters where we did work all around the globe. And I had the great fortune to be able to see a nonprofit vantage point from multiple angles. So we've talked about this before. It actually started in landscaping, so like picking weeds and mowing grass and being outside the building. I wasn't even inside. You know, like you talk about Hamilton, like the room where it happened. I wasn't even in the building where it happened, right? I was outside. But I spent time in college going through an intercultural studies program in business and eventually made my way inside to help on the humanitarian side. So all of the outreach efforts that would include anything from hunger initiatives, clean water programming, outreach events locally here in the United States, but also abroad in multiple other countries. And then actually made my way around to different departments and teams, helping with marketing, operations, security, working through the development and fundraising aspect before finally launching my company. And so I actually had the great fortune to see from every angle, what does it look like to run a large nonprofit? What does that mean for smaller nonprofits? And how can we get nonprofits a sustainable foundation to actually grow to whatever size they need to fulfill their mission? And that actually launched me into my current business, Evan Cox Consulting, where we help nonprofits and small businesses with their marketing or fundraising efforts. And it's allowed us to work with a lot of different brands. I think we've talked about this, over 150 brands since 2019 and even more since then. We've walked through the StoryBrand framework. We've done a variety of different websites, marketing, communication, copy, collateral. So it's allowed us to see how can you take those key foundational elements of story and help nonprofits and mission-driven businesses get a return on that investment.
What are the key differences and also similarities with regular business and nonprofit?
That's a great question. So in my world, I see a lot of folks where nonprofit leaders who go to a small business or maybe even enterprise company don't seem to have the same level of clout, right? When they come from a inner city mission or a water-based mission company, and then they're going to a for-profit company, they don't seem to have the same level of clout, but they have transferable skills. And in the opposite, I see lots of executives who spent their time in the corporate space and transfer over to the nonprofit space and are glorified, right? If you made business happen, you can help our nonprofit happen as well. The reality is there are nuances to nonprofits and nonprofit marketing, but there's a lot of transferable skills. I don't think that if you've survived in one, you can't survive in the other. The essentials of teamwork, communication, thorough strategic planning, all of those things are transferable across the globe. It just comes down to, especially in the marketing world, what does it look like for us to have an individual audience that may be vastly different from another one of our audiences, right? Where a lot of businesses maybe have unique segments and markets and products, but maybe a plumbing company still has people who want plumbing for their home or business. So there's a lot of like similar messaging and marketing. In the nonprofit space, which we'll talk about, you have a donor who sometimes wants something in complete opposition to what a direct recipient of those goods wants, right? Worked with a nonprofit, and we've talked about this before, where the donor said, I want to help the needy. And when we interview the needy, what's the first thing they want to say? We do want to help, but we don't want to be called needy, right? So how can we hold both of those things in tension, knowing that they're both true and they're both things that people espouse, but the highest level of good intent? But how do we bring that all into one website? Or how do we make that cohesive marketing feel like they're not in opposition, but they're actually in concert together? So that's where you start to see nonprofit marketing really have some nuance.
What do you think most nonprofit leaders get wrong about their nonprofit marketing?
Ooh, that's a great question. So in some spaces, especially like the faith-based sector, I see a lot of nonprofits shy away from this idea of marketing and sales because they feel like it doesn't apply to them, or it feels spammy or sleazy or disingenuous. And the reality is you can define marketing a lot of different ways. I define marketing simply as an avenue to start and build new relationships. That's where it's at. Simply starting and building new relationships. And if you take it from that vantage point, that's actually core. It's fundamental to what nonprofits should be doing, right? Building and starting relationships with donors or volunteers or board members or direct recipients. Across the board, no matter who you're talking to, in a small business and nonprofit setting, marketing is really about how do we start, build, and then steward those relationships into something that benefits everyone.
Yeah, so what do you think is lost when marketing is not in place for those nonprofits?
It certainly doesn't diversify how you're able to sustain your organization. So there's a lot of feast or famine that comes with grant marketing. Like, for example, if you're going after like a specific grant that a foundation or the U.S. government or another entity might put out, I've talked to lots and lots of nonprofits that, and this is a little bit kind of tooth and cheek here, but I speak to a lot of folks who are like, oh my gosh, we just got the grant and they're popping the cork, right? And we've got $1.2 million for our programming, and the next 6 months are going to be great. We don't know what's going to happen beyond that. We'll probably have to get another grant, but life is good for today. And then other folks who are trying to figure out, like, what does that look like, and how do I build the program, and how do I get donors, or I'm so busy trying to do the work of serving the people that we are trying to help, I don't have time to actually meet with donors and tell them what's going on or solicit funds. If you have an active strategic marketing and fundraising plan in place, what it does is it prioritizes your short-term and your long-term strategy. We've seen this a lot in business. You've mentioned this before in the podcast, but when it comes to a short-term strategy, it's how do I make sure that we can keep our doors open today? And your long-term strategy is how do I make sure that we're sustainable and our lead source or our funding sources are diverse? So that means that you've got a lot of small individual donations coming in from a lot of people, mixed with some big grants or some big donations from corporate entities or businesses. And in the short term, you've found ways to get some activity going so that donations are coming in the door and you can actually serve someone tomorrow as well as next year.
Great. So let's assume someone who is leading a nonprofit is listening to this, or perhaps not even a nonprofit, maybe just initiative or some kind of like summer project they need to raise money for. It can be like really small or even bigger ones. How you would talk to this person, like how would you lead him through saying like, hey, if you're starting from zero, this is how we start, and these are the first things to put in order, to say?
That's a great question, because there's two approaches here, right? You can be, let's say you're a nonprofit or a charity organization that has some level of donorship. You have a donor file, but it might not be as big or as diverse as you want. So that means maybe you've got 30 donors who give every month, but in order to really turn things up and serve in a bigger way, you need 60 donors a month at a certain level. Okay, that probably takes one approach. But if you are literally signing the paperwork to become, here in the US, a 501c3 nonprofit, or if you're across the globe in whatever that jurisdiction looks like, if you're starting from square one, it's a little bit of a different ballgame, right? Because you don't have donors. You probably don't have a website, or you don't have a CRM, or you don't have some of those things. And so it's about attacking the most important thing first. So I would say, for example, let's say that you are a nonprofit that just got established, but you happen to be a professional athlete. We talked about this before, right? Kristaps Porzingis, right? Here in the U.S., from your area, let's say that he's wanting to start a nonprofit. My suggestion is that we work on messaging and we identify what kind of nonprofit cause initiative he wants to have, build out a plan of partnership with another organization or whatever he's doing, and then we actually get a plan together to pull together a website with the right messaging, because he already has an existing audience. Right? The most important thing in this scenario for Kristaps is he's got an audience, right? Everything is set up. He just needs to make sure that he's really clear and concise and gives a next step call to action. But if you're not an international sports star and you don't have an audience, what do we need to do? Go to the people in your network that you do know, that do trust you. Because the reality is, most of the time, people are not giving to you for all the possible reasons that they could give to you. Like, for instance, when I've done some international humanitarian work, I had people that gave to me because they loved the location that I was traveling to. Or when I was in fundraising development, people gave to us because they loved the team that was representing the work. They had a good partnership and relationship with us. Or maybe they cared about the kind of work. So they didn't really care about where. It could be Guatemala, it could be India, it could be United States. They didn't care. As long as you're doing clean water work, that's what they care about. And then there's other people who want the most bang for their buck. And so they want to see stats or reports or an annual breakdown, or they want to give at the end of the year here in the US because they'll get the biggest tax break, right? There's actually about 8 different categories that could define what somebody wants in the donor sphere. We have to figure out what are the things in your network that people care about so that you can start proactively approaching that. Because you're not going to have someone in that scenario who probably wants to give for all of those things very often. It's very, very few times that I've seen that someone wants to give to clean water because they care about it. They want to give it in Guatemala because that's where they want it to be done. They also really love you, and it happens to be the end of the year, so they want to tax. Like, having all of those things doesn't happen all at the same time very often. You have to understand who your network is, what it is that they want, and then if you don't have a large enough network to at least get you started, you have to make sure that you have a viable plan to figure out, okay, who does care about what I'm doing? Are there foundations that would give to the work that I'm doing? Is there another nonprofit that I could partner with because maybe they need our expertise and they want to team up? Then it becomes a matter of like, who do I find, donors or partners or anyone else that could care about the cause that we want to support? And how could we benefit them in a partnership that really attacks things from all angles, and it's a win-win for them and for us?
So if you have a community and you are an international sports star, you just make sure your messaging is right and you go to your audience. So, and if you don't have an audience, yeah, you have to build one and work on that. I know as StoryBrand guides, you have this StoryBrand brand script, the 7 elements of the story that can be helpful. But maybe you can give an overview how that can be helpful for nonprofit, and perhaps there's a smaller element that if someone is listening and still confused how it works all together, you can just say like, hey, start with this or so. What would be your comment on this?
Yeah, so there's actually more than one way to create, write, and share a compelling story. You've seen this before, I've seen this before. It doesn't mean that you have to tell a story the exact same way each time. Here's a perfect example. In the nonprofit space or a charity, you might have a mission-based brand script, which is what we would refer to it as. Someone who is ultimately receiving the support, the goods. Think of food pantry, for example. You're in a impoverished community. There's folks who are disenfranchised, and you want to create some messaging that says, we have food available Monday through Friday. Come these hours, we can give you milk, bread, water, whatever the case may be. That's more of a missional story, a mission-based brand script, where you're trying to make sure that you communicate to the end recipient, the audience that you serve, and tell them, hey, we know there's a problem. You don't have food, for example. Again, being very simplified. You don't have food. We have food. We know that you need nutritional food that offers value to you and your family. So we've outlined our program to cover A, B, and C. Come here, sign up online, whatever, and we will make sure that you get fed. That's one approach and is really important for some nonprofits. On the other hand, a donor-based brand script speaks directly to the people who are supporting your work. Now, that could be individual donors, family-based donors, corporate sponsors, grant and foundations. I mean, anywhere that you might have someone that you are soliciting funds or partnership from, you need a donor-based brand script. And the reality is, it's a very different story that you're telling. On a mission-based brand script like we covered, it might be as simple as, you need food, we have food, we will care for you with dignity. Like, there's some nuance to it. On the other side, you don't have donors who want food. You don't, right? Most of the time, the people who are giving to that food pantry, man, they don't need food. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in a position to give. They want to make a difference, or they want to leave a legacy, or they want to make an impact. I mean, you could talk about any number of things that are higher up the hierarchy of needs, right? They want self-actualization. They want to support a community. And we have to make sure that our story is tweaked using those same 7 elements to posit a problem that we know they're dealing with and offer a solution. And here's the tricky part. If you have a donor, and let's say this isn't the case, but a lot of times people think of donors as people with a wad of cash or a credit card ready to just give. Let's say that is the scenario. But what kind of problem does that donor have? They don't have a cash problem, but what they do have in that moment is they don't have a way to serve the community that you have with intentionality or an expert level of education. So oftentimes when I was working with donors directly one-on-one, I would travel, have coffee with them, sit down, fly across the country to meet with major donors, or pick up the phone, write a handwritten note, email them, thank them. Here's what they would be after. They would say, listen, I have a successful business. I love what I do. I feel called to this. But at the same time, I love that you guys are helping feed people in your community. I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I don't have the wherewithal or the know-how to do that. But I know that if I partner with you, I can have a piece of making a difference through our partnership. So it's about trying to identify for that donor, what is it that they actually want? Are they void of meaning in some small way because maybe they want to give back and they don't know how to? And you can be the conduit to help that. So you actually need to have both of those stories on standby so that you can use and deploy them whenever it's appropriate. Because some nonprofits, like the one that I was sharing before we started recording, is right here in St. Louis. And the people that they serve are right here in St. Louis, which is, again, for any international audience, I'm right smack dab in the middle of the U.S. So donors actually live side by side in the same community as the people, refugees who are being helped, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. Your website then has to speak, for example, to both of those audiences. If everyone has internet access and they live in the same community, you have to have a web presence that speaks to both of those messages. But if you serve people in, let's say, oh my gosh, um, some far corner of Africa where there's no internet access at all, you probably have a website that's more devoted to donors, right? Because you want donors and transactions and email. You want to build relationships, but the people that you're serving might be halfway across the globe and don't have internet access, aren't looking at your website even if they did. And then your website can go all in on serving the donor. So you have to identify who are those audiences, where are they at, what are they looking for from us, and how integrated or separated do those stories need to be.
Excellent. And in your experience for donor-based websites, when it comes to call to actions, right? Usually there's like donate now. What is your experience with kind of more transitional calls to actions where perhaps you kind of need to earn the permission to keep talking, right? You give, I don't know, video in exchange for email address, and then you give something else. So how does the immediate call to action differs, and maybe you can share some strategies for the kind of transitional calls to action, which are kind of slower and taking the donor by hand and leading like learn this, and this, and then
Yeah. And that's the starting point, right? When we talk about short-term and long-term strategy, the short-term strategy is you have a Rolodex, although nobody has a Rolodex anymore, right? It's in your contact list on your phone. Short-term strategy might be, I have 5 people that I know care about providing clean water. They're in my phone. I'm going to pick up the phone and see if they want to partner with me on this project. That could be short-term, like super tactical, guerrilla marketing style. We're going to live to see another day and support and serve and fund our mission. Long term is, in your example, maybe how do we have a marketing funnel set up on our website that gives people the chance to donate if they know that they want to do so, they know that they already care about it, they can move forward. Or maybe there's a transitional call, a download, an interaction, a checklist of some kind that allows them to say, maybe I can begin a relationship. Now, here's the tricky part. On the for-profit side, the small businesses that you and I serve, it becomes maybe a little bit easier because we think about, oh, yeah, we could do a PDF download or a webinar or a quiz or an assessment. But people often get stumped when it comes to creating those kind of assets for donors because they're trying to figure out, well, what does the donor want? So here's a few examples that I've used that I think could really help. If you're a faith-based nonprofit, maybe it's a devotional or a prayer guide connected to the cause that you care about and serve. We did this for a nonprofit in Arkansas, a couple hours south of me. It's a state south of me, right? And they said, oh my gosh, one of the things that we actually do is we provide meals and food. And so we did a devotional for families around the impact of hunger and what that looks like. And it was an opportunity for families to get together and collaborate on that. Or what does it look like to maybe have some sort of get involved and volunteer guide? I have 3 kids, right, spanning age 11 to 5. And I really love getting my family out to volunteer. But it's also a big ordeal, right? How can we make it easy for individual families to say, oh, this is what our family cares about. Maybe we don't even know. We want to help, but we don't know how to help. And you can actually outline through a checklist or a guide of some sort, an assessment, what does that look like? And how do I serve them? And what is our family going to do? What is our family best equipped to do? So you could take that approach. There's a lot of ways for you to get your audience more aware of the problem you solve, the people that are being served, and find some tangible way for them to get involved.
Just an example came to my mind. For example, there are some like really tough issues that everyone cares about, like human trafficking, hunger, vaccines, health. Those might be like that. Everyone is like the big issues. But then I was working with a nonprofit who was also kind of bringing impact, for example, in leadership, like, right? And that's not so screaming as a hungry child on your website, right? It's not that immediate, like, why should we care about leadership or spiritual leadership in this country? Or, for example, one of their programs was supporting artists, just kind of coming alongside and building healthy just artist community to express art. And how do you
What's the problem there, right? Like,
yeah, how do you navigate, how you, Evan, would navigate these tensions, right, between this there's hunger, and then there's just kind of a group of artists, and what's the problem with them, right?
yeah. So I think that's a really interesting part. And we've talked about this before, but what happens in the moment of crisis? A disaster, a tornado, a storm, a tsunami comes through, right? Or here in the US, I don't know if you've seen these, but there's actually ASPCA videos, which are helping get animals off the street. And so usually those commercials will have like a flea-ridden dog hiding in the corner, wrapped up in barbed wire. And people are like, at first, I'm going to donate because I want to save that puppy. But the reality is, if you see that time and time again, you get desensitized to it. You can get donor fatigue, right? Maybe initially you have a really great response, but it dips off pretty quickly because people just can't stomach seeing that same image over and over again. So you have that really compelling need where it makes sense. There's no education needed. But maybe your nonprofit cares about a cause or serves a demographic where there's some education needed. So that transitional offer could be more detailed understanding. It could be research. It could be a case study. It could be an outline of stats of things that you didn't know. Let's say it's in the artist community. Maybe there is a problem where the arts are kind of dwindling, or there's not sufficient funding or place for people to experience the art. So if there's a problem, you can attach it there and you can have a resource that educates around that. Or on the flip side, maybe there doesn't seem to be a tangible problem that donors want to give to. So why don't you flip it? Why don't you say, oh my gosh, instead of saying we don't have a place, you can say we already have a place. We already have all of these amazing programs and we want more people to experience the arts. Because the reality is that the more you experience art, the more your level of fulfillment and joy increases, like whatever that is. Instead of taking the negative problem approach, take the opportunity approach and say, we've helped 500 people, but we could help 1,000 people if we just got the word out and we're able to expand our programming.
Excellent. I think those are great ideas. What do you feel is the question I'm not asking you regarding nonprofits?
So most of the executive directors, nonprofit leaders, marketing managers in a nonprofit that I speak to or know personally wrestle with a couple of things. The first is in a psychology of money. And the second is, okay, what do we do in terms of having to support multiple audiences? So let's tack the first one real quickly. When it comes to a psychology of money, oftentimes you have a big gap between the people who are fundraising or asking for money or producing a gala and the people who have enough wealth to support those initiatives. There's a pretty big gap, right? So here in the US, it's not uncommon for a fundraiser to maybe make $50,000 US and be continually pitching, talking to, interacting with donors who make millions of dollars every year, right? There's a big disparity. Your psychology of money needs to really adapt to be holistic and healthy, to be abundance mindset focused. Otherwise, you're going to easily get stuck. For example, if you're doing a program and you're like, oh my gosh, we can't ask people for $1,000 because I could never give $1,000. We have to keep reorienting and asking ourselves, well, could our audience give that even though we can't? And is that asking too little, or is that appropriately funding the mission? So a psychology of money is so easy for a fundraising team or an individual nonprofit to get stuck in and limit themselves unintentionally. And number two, what I think we really want to focus on is the people that you serve. So we've used two examples primarily today, right? But it could be the arts. It could be charity that does some sort of like hunger campaign or a water program. The people that receive that clean water or those meals or that arts programming are really important. Those are your primary audiences, right? Because you wouldn't exist if they didn't exist. But it's so easy for folks to look at their donor base and say, that is the group of people that we pull from when we need more funding. That is the people that we go to when we want to invite to a gala. But the reality is, your donor and your funding audience is just as important as the people that you serve. There's actually no one that's better than another. If you don't care for the people who fund your mission with the same level of intentionality that you care for the people who are receiving it, then you're doing a major disservice. And you're actually running your nonprofit with a smaller mindset than you should. Because the reality is, people don't have food, and then they do have food, and there's transformation, right? The reason your nonprofit exists. But for donors, just like we talked about with messaging, they don't have a vehicle to be able to give and deliver the kind of impact they want to see. And then they do because of their partnership with you. So you're delivering two different products and services. One is highly transformative in an intellectual space, right? Or an emotional space. The other one might be really physical and tangible. But if you don't capture the ability to serve both of those audiences with intentionality, then you're going to miss out.
So serving both audiences with the same passion and energy and intention. Wonderful. Is there any final word you want to add to this conversation as we are wrapping up?
Leading a nonprofit of any size is a grind. Anybody who's listening that's in the nonprofit space, volunteering, donating, you realize this, right? You're solving some kind of problem, which means there's going to be challenges and obstacles. So number one, don't quit. If you're early on and you haven't seen the kind of return or influence that you want to see, keep going. If you're having any level of fatigue because you've already seen results, keep going. The work that you do as a charity or nonprofit really matters. And when you can get your fundraising and your marketing together, combined with a cohesive approach. And we talked about this, right? I've got the template and the coaching and the things that we can do to help support that. But if you align your team or even your individual functions, if you own the whole thing, make sure that your nonprofit marketing and fundraising efforts are story-based, that they're telling a compelling story, that you're telling it in the right way to the right audience, and that you're proactively investing in both your donor audience and your end user audience. So that across the board, you're starting and you're building the relationships that we talked about with intentionality, because that's all that marketing and fundraising is. Starting and building new relationships.
Wonderful. Where can people find more about you?
So if you go to evancoxconsulting.com/resources, you can see that we blog about nonprofit, small business marketing and fundraising. There are some free additional transitional offers like we talked about. And there's also a strategic fundraising plan template that I've created that folks can actually download and build out a program or a plan based on everything that we've discussed today, if they want to do it for themselves or have me and my team hop in to help as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Such great insights. So here's the time for my fun question I ask every guest. So, drum roll. Awesome. What has made you laugh lately really, really hard?
And it has to be lately, right?
Yes, your first impression.
Okay. So, I am going to go to a question that I actually heard yesterday from my 8-year-old son. Actually, yesterday, my littlest, and who's 5, was in the hospital. And he's totally fine now, but we were working through some tests and he had an IV, right? We've all seen the IV if you're in the hospital where there's fluids and things.
Mm-hmm.
And my son asked, my 8-year-old son, he said, hey, if we were to swap that bag of fluid out with air and we put it in the IV, would he turn into a balloon? If we put air in that bag, could we pump my brother up and turn it? And I said, first of all, that's really funny. And second of all, don't go anywhere near the bed. You got to sit in the chair across the room. No, you can. But I just got this mental image of him thinking, ooh, those are fluids. But if we had air or helium, we could turn him into a balloon.
Right.
I'm like, that's not how it works.
Right. Awesome. That's kids' brilliant minds at work.
It's very brilliant. And I'd love, real quick as we close, I'd love to ask you the same question. What has made you laugh recently?
Oh, this week I was meeting a group of friends. Anyways, as we met, there was this one moment when the mood is perfect and somebody in the group just has this tremendous creative humor, which will be completely inappropriate for this podcast moment. But it really made me laugh so hard, my stomach was aching, and I was thinking like, I so need to do that more, because those moments when you laugh that hard, I think that's very, very, very needed for everyone and healthy, because otherwise life becomes super, super serious.
I completely agree.
Thank you for your time today. It's been amazing and insightful interview. Thank you so much, Evan. We did it.
We did it. Thanks again. So glad to be here.
And that concludes today's episode of our podcast. We hope you enjoyed the insights from Evan Cox on nonprofit marketing. Check out the show notes for this episode to find some great resources for fundraising, including a free website homepage template, marketing funnel guide for churches, and strategic fundraising plan for nonprofits. Also, don't miss Jo Caruana's demonstration of her PR strategy called Gotham in the next episode. Hit subscribe not to miss. Thank you for tuning into this episode of our Story Clicks podcast, where we explore ways to grow your business, develop your creativity, and live life better.